Dr. Niro, how are you doing?
Mr. Kilby.
It feels like it's been forever.
It has been forever, and with the quarantine or isolation, depending on your perspective, it's been, well, literally weeks and weeks.
It has been, yeah.
And you've been around the world in the meantime?
I have been. I was in California.
Yes.
And Texas.
Yes.
So it was a bit of an odd time to travel.
I know both states really well.
In the middle of it wasn't quite in the middle of a pandemic, but right at the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and
it was
how are
interesting
people
times.
in California versus Texas? Could you tell a difference in their mindsets or attitudes or anything?
Gosh. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really spend. Obviously, I'm cognizant of what we were dealing with the pending at that time pandemic, but so I really didn't spend much time in amongst the people and the crowds, and kept to myself, did my thing. I went over to consult with a clinic over in San Diego, which is amazing, in San Diego.
You've been doing some amazing things over
Yeah,
there.
I met so it was an amazing world-leading metabolic disease expert,
Yes.
leading scientist in that field. Was able
Are
to,
you allowed to let some of the new viewers know some of the stuff
yeah,
that you guys
absolutely.
discussed?
So this guy, he's expert in mitochondrial dysfunction, skeletal muscle metabolism, obesity medicine, and I convinced him a little while ago to set up a clinic.
Yes.
To get, to broaden his scope and reach and go beyond drug development into the world of actually looking after patients on the ground right now, rather than always telling people, we'll have a treatment in 20 years' time. How about making a difference to people now? So he's put together this clinic in San Diego, which is amazing, and then he asked me to come over and help train the staff.
Wow.
Which included the doctor, because the doctor himself, he's dealing with his own weight issues. So I got to contribute and coach him, and he was unbelievably receptive to that and really generous in his willingness to let me contribute in that way.
I suppose that a lot of what you do, it's down to the recipient and how open they're going to be, and whether they're actually willing to grab what you're saying, process it, evaluate it, and then run with it. So I guess you would have come across a lot of people who would perhaps be trigger happy to be dismissive or just say nope and put up barriers. How would you cope, with people like that? Would you try and reason with them? What are some of the artistic approaches you have to deal with such situations?
Yeah, as a health performance coach, so health is the context. But who I am is a performance coach. So I coach people's performance, and performance is distinguished as action or inaction. So it's either what you do or don't do. And it's really simple when you're dealing with biological processes.
It's binary.
Pretty much, yeah. You if you eat too many calories, you will gain weight.
Yes, period.
It's just that black and white.
Yes.
Now the problem arises though, by that rationale, people think, okay, if I just eat less calories, then I'll lose the weight. And that logic makes sense, it's just not the way that biology works. And not only the biology, it's also the human being.
Which you and I were talking about earlier on, where you very eloquently said that a lot of people just see human beings as physiology. And we said this in the context of a lot of doctors suffering with tunnel vision, especially during the current pandemic and the situation where doctors are only looking at it from a health perspective. And whilst, of course, that is a focus, governments have a much harder job. They have to balance economic concerns, they have to look at public policy, compliance. There's a whole raft of things that the government and public health and policymakers need to evaluate and consider. And that's why you said so nicely that it's again, human beings are a lot more than physiology, psychology, behaviour.
Yeah.
So much.
And it's all about how you view the human being. Is it from the perspective of physiology? Is it from the perspective of psychology? You could also view a human being as a set of conversations. It's the kind of the narrative. What do we tell ourselves? That statement, I am, fill in the blank. And whatever you say after I am, it's like in that moment you're the judge, jury, sentencer. People may be experiencing right now from the mundane, you go, I am bored. All of a sudden you see an act consistent with a bored person, or I am overwhelmed, or I am fat.
Yeah.
It's whatever it is that you say, you are in that moment as a matter of your speaking.
Yes.
So,
which is another thing we said as well, and I'm going to let you describe this, where we were talking about language and how language can actually affect behaviour. It affects perceptions, perspective, context.
Yes.
You were saying, and I'm going to let you talk about this, of course, where we spoke about the use of certain adjectives.
Yes.
Remember?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's language. I think the basic view of language is that it describes the world.
Yeah.
So you can either describe an object or a thing more or less accurately. And often people are related to as things, like objects with properties and characteristics. And we see that in our relationships, in the beginning of a relationship, the person's just like a possibility of anything, and you're enamored, and you can stay up till 3 a.m. talking to them, and then at some point in the relationship, you wake up early in the morning, you look over at the other side of the bed, and it's like who that person is. If you press this button, they'll react in that way. If you say X, they'll respond with Y.
Yeah.
And it's like there's this knowing, and you're then relating to someone as a fixed object with properties and characteristics. And we have that relationship to ourselves even. We know what is possible, what's not possible, what I can do, what I can't do. But none of that's true, it's just what we have been saying.
Yes.
Right? So we live into that, and there was a paper that I recently sent to you that talked about metaphors, and I think it's pertinent to what we're dealing with right now, given the COVID-19 pandemic. Did you read that paper?
It's almost fair to say you are what you describe yourself to be.
Not even to describe, it's a declaration.
Yeah.
So the phenomenon in language that creates is declaration.
Yes.
We say the Declaration of Independence in the United States. We don't say the description of independence. They're not describing anything. Or when you get married, there's a moment before you're married, and then someone says, I now declare you married, and then after that, you're married. So it's a phenomenon that exists only in language, but it's a very real phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right? So this is important, because that extends to the metaphors that we use in everyday language. And it was interesting because given what we're dealing with right now, it just got me thinking about this cognitive scientist at Stanford. Her name's Laura Boroditsky. Look up her research, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And she studied a town or a city in the United States that had this increase in crime rates. And she took 2 study groups, and she gave them exactly the same statistics to kind of look at the situation that we're dealing with and propose a solution. Now this is important because we're dealing with some pretty tough decision-making times at the moment, and it's unprecedented. No one knows how to deal with this. We've never dealt with it before. It's a little bit like when a kid runs out on the road and to chase a ball, and a car's coming at them. They don't have pre-existing neuronal brain patterns to deal with that, and they just kind of stare at the car, right? They don't know how to respond. And unless you've dealt with it before, you don't know how to respond. So it's a little bit like that. So everyone's looking at the statistics, but everyone's seemingly interpreting the numbers different ways.
Yeah.
And they're not equipped to be able to interpret the numbers.
That's something that I've been, I suppose, rubbed the wrong way about, where a lot of doctors in particular have overnight become armchair experts with public policy, government policy, epidemiology, virology, infectious diseases, everything, and they qualify their unconsciously incompetent perceptions and opinions and the rhetoric that they're pushing out on the basis of having a medical degree. I am a doctor, and therefore I am entitled to talk about this new condition, this new disease, this pandemic. And I think that's actually quite dangerous. And the problem is when you have so many learned voices, all saying different things and all opining in different ways, but then proposing and submitting that what they're saying is correct, then we have chaos and pandemonium. There should really be one voice at a time of trouble. That should be the federal voice, modulated by each state or territory in Australia, on the basis of all the evidence they're getting. Now, some of that's going to be wrong, and it's all easy in hindsight. We look at so many things with rose-tinted spectacles, and of course with experience, it's easy to criticize. But as with everything in life, it's easier to throw stones than to actually deal with problems. And I've seen some incredible stuff in online fora. Again, I'll stick to the topic of doctors, seeing as we're in a clinic right now and observing the 1.5 metre rule and everything else that is expected. There is a perception as well. But some people are using this opportunity to push their own agendas and to be vexatious towards competitors, and they are pushing incorrect information, as Trump would say, misinformation, but it's in overdrive right now. And what beggars belief is, at a time when there should be unity, some of these, I'm going to put fringe players or lone wolves or whatever you want to call them, are actually encouraging doctors to put in complaints to Crime Stoppers and the police and so on. And I'm aware that a lot of police forces are having their time wasted. So again, beggars belief, my jaw drops when I see some of this bizarre stuff. But anyway, that's my rant over. Back to our...
I think we've all got our own version of that, you know.
Yeah.
I think we all do, but I mean, getting back to that research paper, it's pertinent to your point. So, 2 study groups had the same statistics about the increasing crime rates. Now that we're talking about crime rates, this paper was published in about 9 or 10 years ago, and one group used a metaphor of beast. So beast was used to create what was happening in terms of the same statistics, right? But just beast was used as a metaphor, and then certain language was used to help emphasize that world of beast. You know, there's terror and there's something out to get you, and you know, you've got to you got to beat the beast, or you got to run away from the beast. Interestingly, the metaphor used with the other study group was virus, right?
I do know this one now, and that rings a bell.
Right?
Absolutely, yes.
It was virus, and then they asked them to come up with solutions to this dilemma of the increasing crime rate. How would you deal with it? Where beast was used as a metaphor, their solution was increase the number of police and the size of the jails. So this kind of points to the finger pointing, the threat. There's a bad guy. Someone has to be a bad guy, and the virus is invisible. So it's pretty hard, like, to make the SARS-CoV-2 virus the bad guy.
Yeah.
So we make each other the bad guy. There's a lot of finger pointing going on. But when virus, in this particular research paper, when virus was used as the metaphor, their solution was education and social reform.
Wow. With
an intention to inoculate the community and therefore cause protection for the future. It was very future based, you know, versus where it's a beast, it's all about blame and who can we point the finger to. And whenever you point the finger elsewhere, what you don't ever have to deal with is being responsible yourself.
And you know what? I think that beautifully summarizes the current dilemma as well. It's about, and I think even, you know, the great American saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But it's also not as binary and as simple as that by the same token. So we touched on perspective. Is the glass half full or half empty?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
But
it's interesting. So I have a couple that I coach, you know, and with regards to their metabolic health, and you know, they want to lose weight and restore health and vitality, and I coach them, and they ring me because they're about to have an argument, So in their genius, called me, right? I'm not a marriage counsellor or anything
Counselor
like that.
Kilby.
But they just wanted someone else, I guess, to referee the match. But what was brilliant was the wife is a nurse, and she's confronting going back to work. They've got to contribute to the income, and they've got a toddler, and for her to go back to work in the hospital system, the toddler has to go into daycare. So now she's potentially exposed, the child's potentially exposed, the husband's dealing with Graves' disease, so he has a compromised immune system as it is, and he sees the world through a view of, I'm a man, I've got to go make a living, earn the money, and that's important, I've got to look after the family.
Yeah.
She's a nurse, like the most caring
human
human being on the planet, and of course she is primarily concerned for the health and safety of the family. So they had a clash in values, and it was interesting in the microcosm of a marriage, of that relationship. It's exactly what's going on in the greater society
Yeah.
level. You know, what's more important? People's health? Can we lose a few? You know, or do we sacrifice the economy to save some lives?
Which then breaks families and the psychiatric and psychological morbidity. And I'll give an example as well. I spoke this morning to a transsexual patient, and this patient has fully transitioned, so surgeries have been performed, and there's been a lot of injectables used for maintenance. And this patient's doctor has refused to provide treatments in the current scenario, which, by the way, is not illegal. So you can, by law, in all states, a doctor can give scheduled medication when done in a clinic environment. And with my background in medical legal work, and I've checked with lawyers, I've looked at the paperwork, and even discussed it with indemnity organisations and the police. So this is actually very much on point. As of the current time, contemporaneously, it is not an issue. But due to misinformation, fear, virtue signalling, whatever it may be, this patient has been left in the lurch. This patient now has become a bit of a recluse, does not want to engage with anyone, is very depressed, and actually rang up and said, I've heard that you're open and you're willing to treat people like me who are affected with, dysphoria and perhaps dysmorphia as well. And I said yes, and I went through it, and actually, people again have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and they've forgotten that yes, we must not do any harm, but we must also look at the opportunity cost, which is perhaps the wrong descriptor here, but perhaps the side effects or the fallout of taking such a hard-lined approach, particularly one which is flawed by interpretation of current policies and guidelines. But anyway, back to this patient. I've said, come on in. I'm happy to treat you. I'm happy to take over your care and completely ensure that I've done what I need to do, and at the same time counsel the patient, and I let the patient know that perhaps the patient is over-interpreting how others may see that patient, but at the same time, if what we do is make someone more functioning and integrated with society, I think that's a very important thing. And there's actually a wonderful physician in the UK called Dr. Pierce, and he, like us, is very self-assured, tries to be pragmatic and objective, and he speaks his mind. And he has released a lot of superb videos on Instagram and YouTube about the more holistic picture. And being a doctor means that you bring all the different strands together, and you kind of have to coordinate all of those things. So it's not just the art of injecting, but it's also choosing the right patient. So there's a psychological element, there is looking at risk management, so on and so forth. And I think arguably we've become a little bit too fixated with, as you said, finger pointing. What troubles me is those who may have a business in trouble or may have other issues themselves and now vexatiously using the situation to harm peers and competitors. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah, it's a dilemma in that, I don't know, you could kind of say in the middle of a pandemic, we're in wartime.
Yeah.
This is wartime. That's kind of the analogy that gets created. When people aren't dying from a viral pandemic, for example, we call that peacetime. And it's during peacetime you can do all the research and development, you can do some testing, etc. You can do some of the more intellectual research, curiosity-driven research. But during wartime, it's like, got to save lives. And there's this every life matters. But that every life matters, that could be applied to this patient as well. And you know, if it makes the difference between them being a functional human being in society or they commit suicide, which
exactly right.
Right.
But even broken families as well. Yeah. Domestic violence has apparently gone up over the last 2 weeks. I think there have been statistics there. People are scared. A lot of people are depressed being at home for 2 to 4 weeks. And in countries where they've had a more aggressive lockdown on the kinds of services available in hospitals, for example, the concern now is, are people now missing out on treatments which are going to affect the quality of their life, which may also perhaps push them from one category into a worse category by the time all of these restrictions are lifted. So there is that knock-on effect, the sequelae of the situation and what is instituted and mandated today. And again, I think it's very easy to just worry about one aspect and forget about the whole thing.
Yes.
And that's how society works.
Yes.
You need lawyers, you need journalists even, you need doctors, accountants, cleaners, chefs, you know, drivers, pilots. That's the way the world works. It's quite sobering when you think about how everything can be knocked off kilter by removing one part of society. I think some countries in the world where the refuse collectors have stopped working because they're worried about perhaps contaminating this condition or disease from tissues and that kind of thing. There's now a concern about rats, infestations, cholera, and so on. So it's a lot more complex. But
I know. There's just so much going on. So how can people empower themselves in a time of real uncertainty?
Call this guy.
Yeah,
Dean Kilby.
Look, what you got to deal with is the reality of what's so, and you got to keep going back to the facts. Like actually, in reality, what's actually happening. You know, if I go back to that couple that I was coaching, you know, they're worried about the income and the health, etc. And I asked them a simple question. It's like, how much money do you actually need for the next 2 to 3 months? They weren't clear on that. So you got to work on the specifics. If you don't deal with the specifics, the actual detail, then what ended up happening was a clash of values. And then it was about being positional inside a particular point of view, and it just never goes well. And neither of them were willing to let go of the banana. You've heard of that saying? Yeah. You get like a clearing in the jungle, and you want to catch a monkey. You get some bananas and you put it in the clearing, and you put a perspex box on top of the bananas with a little hole cut into it, and the monkeys will come down from the tree and stick their hand in the hole and grab hold of the banana. But then the poachers would come and put a bag on the monkey and dong it on its head. All the monkey had to do was let go of the banana and it would be free. But because it couldn't get the banana out of the hole, it wouldn't let go of the banana and it got trapped. And that's what happens is we get trapped inside this point of view that most of the time isn't even valid anyway. So you got to deal with the what's so. And what's so right now is that it's uncertain. We've never dealt with anything like this, people are figuring it out. What people tend to do is go online and look at all the statistics and try and get the truth. Everyone's after the truth. There ain't no truth. I promise you. You won't find it, right? You're just going to do your head in. And I get sent so much of these videos and articles, and it's like people are like, I just want your thoughts on this, and is this true, and is this real? And you know what my response is? Stay at home. Wash your hands. Do as we're supposed to be doing, right? Just the real basics. Thinking that you're going to be able to figure it out and get to the truth and know, it's like, come on. You know, that's not to be invalidated either, but what there is to be responsible for is in a condition of much uncertainty and stress, and we should talk about how that impacts our well-being as well. People start to find or try to figure out what they can be certain about, and they're looking for the truth, they're looking for some level of foundation, they're looking for an endpoint, because if you don't have an endpoint to something, it's really disempowering. If you know that there's a date where you can be free, right? Like I was in quarantine for 2 weeks, at least I knew at day 14 I can get the hell out of my apartment, right, and go for a walk. If you've got that to look forward to, if you have that future to live into, you find yourself way more settled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you haven't got a compelling future to live into, or one that's somewhat predictable, people's behavior gets a little bit crazy.
So there are 2 points, basically predictability and hope. Would you say? Or?
Hope's, man, that's a good one, because hope's like the front and back of the hand.
Yeah.
What always comes with hope is despair.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, it's like positivity. You know, I don't recommend.
Good word.
I don't recommend people being positive about this. This virus and this pandemic is not negative, and now you have to be positive. The virus isn't negative. It's not positive either. But if you're trying to be positive, ultimately that will disempower you. That will disempower you when you're trying to be positive. So what works is to deal with the reality. Deal with what's so. You know, what's threatened right now is people's well-being, their physical health and well-being and safety. And also what's threatened is their financial security and the financial predictability.
Yes.
Right? Look, it may be the case that you eat rice and beans for a year, that you don't buy clothes for 2 years. Maybe that's what happens. But you got to choose that. Not like that we want that, but if that happens, I promise you, you'll be fine. The circumstances are crap, but you're bigger than you know yourself to be.
And the circumstances are affecting everyone.
Everyone.
So it's not as if someone is getting left behind specifically more than anyone else.
I think so. I think, look, I you know, being stuck at home is, you know, you kind of go a little bit crazy, you know, for a little while, and the uncertainty, and there's a lot of pressure on what am I supposed to do, and you go online and everyone's trying to be overly positive, and this is great, and you got to pivot your business, and that seems to be the new buzzword. You got to pivot and you got to be creative, and there seems to be a lot of pressure on people. Sometimes you just got to sit still for a little bit, take a day or two or a week. Nothing bad's going to happen, you know, and work it out. And everyone's kind of screwed.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a leveling of the playing field, and I think this could even help those who have been disempowered in the past in comparing themselves to maybe what they once were, or what they think they should be today, or even to others. Maybe this leveling of the playing field is kind of a new opportunity.
It's almost
for
like
people.
a reset button for a group of people, potentially.
Maybe.
And we did say we wouldn't say anything political, but I
You can't help
but
yourself.
I can't help myself. So
The camera stopped.
the camera stopped, and we were just joking that perhaps it was divine intervention. Perhaps in God's
Or government control.
Yeah, exactly. I did my tinfoil hat again.
Yeah.
But what I was about to say before I was perhaps saved by the bell was that I actually think the federal government has done a pretty reasonable job, and it's easy to criticise things, particularly with the benefit of hindsight. And yes, there have been a couple of notable oversights, in want of a better word. For example, with the ships, the cruise liners docking in Sydney and so on. But again, there are so many moving parts. And of course, some may not have done an optimal job. The Americans would call it a suboptimal job. But I think by and large, the government should be commended. It's tried its very best, certainly with small and medium enterprises, government handouts for people who've been laid off, etc., to try and keep the wheels turning and the cogs moving. And I think that commendation applies around the world, and that also applies to the Labour Party or to the opposition, who've not used the opportunity to score brownie points, to make unnecessary below-the-belt, swipes or attacks at our Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the rest of his team. So I think overall, Australia, despite the criticisms that a lot of armchair experts are making, is trying its best and is doing pretty reasonably. So
yeah, I think there's, well, at least in terms of flattening the curve,
yeah,
right? Whoever came up with that language in the beginning, I think it's just genius.
Yeah.
Right. I think most people can kind of get that. It's a pretty simple explanation, but so my background training in biotechnology was in molecular virology. So I actually did that with the CSIRO at the Australian Animal Health Laboratories, and that was back in the days when Hendra virus. People know of Hendra virus, which emerged. It was another one of these bat-borne viruses, and we believe that it moved from bats to horses and then infected some people as well, and 7 people, 4 of them died, so it was highly fatal.
You must talk about bat metabolism after this bit.
Yeah, we will. But my supervisor then, Professor Lin Fa Wang, who's now the director of emerging infectious diseases at Duke NUS in Singapore. And he's a world-leading coronavirus expert and virologist, and now he's referred to as the Batman because his career has gone from molecular biology into virology and emerging infectious diseases, and now bat physiology, because they're a unique beast in that they can harbour these viruses. But in my conversations with him, I said, what's different now between this and the SARS outbreak? And one of the first things he said was, everyone has a smartphone these days. So everyone's got quick, easy access to all this information, and people are experiencing information overload. That's incredibly stressful, from our, the cognitively, the neuroendocrine system, the hypothalamic pituitary
axis,
adrenal axis, very stressful. People are trying to make sense of it. How I've dealt with it, how I've empowered myself is, it's kind of like when you're dealing with a relationship breakup, with a partner, and you're trying to make sense of it. You're trying to make sense, particularly for guys, right? Trying to make sense of something that's nonsensical, right? Sometimes you just got to let it be, right? And handle what is in your control, right? Look after your well-being. Don't be a jerk to your partner. Be great with your kids.
Yes.
Handle your finances. What you've got in the bank is what you've got in the bank. You really don't have any other amount of money in the bank.
Yes.
Like, you've got what you've got, and you haven't got what you haven't got. And you've got to make that work somehow, right? And that's where it takes the intellectual effort, and we're very fortunate, particularly here in Australia. Even when life's bad, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good, absolutely.
So these are the kinds of, can we jump into the science side of things?
You must.
Yeah.
Because I think you're going to really entertain and enthrall some of the listeners with this whole thing about bats and
oh my gosh,
everything.
So I come back from
amazing.
America and in quarantine for 2 weeks, which was both, I think the first week was great. I love where I live, and it was kind of nice just to lock myself away from people and not feel guilty
all of
about
your
it.
friends and neighbours were bringing food and leaving you by the door.
Totally,
It was amazing.
brilliant.
I was
loved.
enjoying the posts.
Yeah, I shared some of that on Facebook. So, and then my relationship to what was happening in the world was purely intellectual, right? And so I got to read stuff and read papers and connect with some of the experts. I feel fortunate in that I can do that. I can just shoot a text message to, Professor Wang, for example, in Singapore, and just ask questions that I wanted to ask. But yeah, what's fascinating about this virus, so there's been a number of these emerging infectious diseases that have had somewhat of an impact, from Hendra virus that broke out here in Australia in the mid-90s, and then Nipah virus in 99 in Malaysia, and then later on in Bangladesh, and then there was MERS and SARS, and Ebola was in there as well in the mix. So it seems that the bat is the natural host. Reservoir of these viruses, and it's like, why do bats harbour so many viruses? And what is it about bat physiology that allows them to do that without getting sick themselves? And it's fascinating, because when you look at, they're small, right? They're little mammals, and they're the only mammal that's evolved flight, right, currently, right? And they're little, so normally when a mammal's little, it doesn't live so long. And also, an animal that has a fast heart rate, a high metabolic rate, they don't live as long. So when you look at a rat, for example, rats live typically 2 years. And
so it's to do with the surface area and the body?
Generally, yeah. Generally, there's some general rules. Obviously, there's a couple of exceptions, and the bat is one of them. Because bats can live up to 40 years, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
And then when they're flying, their heart rate can get up above 1,000 beats per minute.
Didn't know that.
Right? Isn't that incredible? So their heart's going crazy, which means their metabolism is, going mental and generating a lot of oxidative species.
Yes.
So a lot of free radicals that their system has to handle, and it does it somehow. Not only that, their temperature is raised to that of a high fever, like 42 degrees Celsius. So they're really hot, their heart's going nuts, and they carry a lot of these viruses and not get sick. So they've evolved, we believe, when they evolved flight, along with that came the capacity to handle these free radicals, and they have a better antioxidant defense mechanism, and they can handle the temperature and the high heart rate and still live to 40 years. So I think in time, the more we study these bats, it'll offer some very powerful insights into how could we potentially live longer ourselves, how could we have a more robust immune system, and I use the word robust rather than a stronger immune system, because I think people are trying to use, I don't know what language you use in its place, but how do you boost your immune system, or how do you have a stronger immune system? That kind of implies something about the ability of the immune system to handle a specific infection or something. I think a more robust immune system is more accurate, and there are ways that we can do that as humans as well. So
I think that's actually a really good pick up, the use of the term stronger versus robust. Even if you talk about physical defences for a country, you've got robust defences and you've got strong defences, but they're actually, when you start looking at the differences, they don't mean the same.
No.
There are some very pertinent differences there.
Exactly. So, if you think about the immune system, you've got the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. So, innate immune system is our first line of defense. The adaptive immune system is where you develop protection against a pathogen for the future if you were challenged by that pathogen again. Right?
So, for the benefit of the listeners, by innate, do you mean like macrophages that go around eating up
Yeah, so
Things versus
particularly so with a virus,
immunoglobulins
there's the interferons,
Yep.
and natural killer cells.
Yes.
So this is kind of non-specific. It's not specific to any one particular virus, but it's like the body's first line defense, which is critical if your body has never seen a virus or this particular virus before, which is the case for
So
all
when,
of us.
when you're immune naive
Yes.
with relation to that specific attack.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And what we're seeing in the places that, like in China and Wuhan, and in New York, Italy, the 75% of those who have severe COVID-19 disease severity, 75% of them are obese, have metabolic
Multiple comorbidities
syndrome,
with- yeah.
pre-existing cardiovascular disease, hypertension, right?
Yes.
So,
So in many ways they're already compromised,
yes,
which then arguably makes their robustness or susceptibility higher.
exactly. I think if we take a step back though, let's bring some scientific logic to this and some biological plausibility. If you take a step back and you kind of, if you look at the society right now, just take Australia, the statistics are 2/3 of the adult population are overweight. And half of that cohort are obese. So 1/3 of the population are obese, 1/3 are overweight, and then the rest, we would say, most of them are in the normal weight range.
Yeah.
Okay. What leads what causes the overweight? And with weight, it's not just about having a few extra kilograms of fat. There's a reason why we get fat that contributes to the onset of chronic disease. And I'm talking about metabolic syndrome. If you've got not only some extra fat around your waist, but if you've got high blood pressure, if you've got high cholesterol, if your blood sugar levels are too high as well, these are all aspects of what we call the metabolic syndrome. What underlies that is two phenomena. Insulin resistance, most people are familiar with. So your pancreas releases insulin, but your body doesn't respond to that insulin as well as it ought to. What we believe precedes insulin resistance is what's called hyperinsulinemia. Basically, your pancreas is releasing too much insulin. Now, we used to think, hang on a minute, our cells, our muscle, our fat tissue, our liver is no longer responding to the insulin. So therefore the pancreas has to make more insulin. We think that perhaps the increase in insulin happens first, and then the tissue perhaps responds to that by down-regulating
The receptors.
the GLUT4 receptor that allows the glucose into the cells.
So we're pretty much backflipped in terms of position statement from too much of the
hyperinsulinemia.
Yeah.
I mean, the challenge with that is, we're getting technical here, but the challenge of that theory is it's really difficult to measure hyperinsulinemia, right? How do you measure it? You know, when clients come in and they start the wellness program and I put them on a specific diet, I like, you know, to work with you to get the baseline blood work.
Yes.
And I do look for, I do look at fasting insulin. You know, if it's high, you know, if it's low, it doesn't mean to say that they're not hyperinsulinemic. So what brings this about? Touch my face. I know you're going to judge me. So if you eat too much carbohydrates, and in particular sugar, you're going to have elevated levels of insulin. Okay? Over time, that causes insulin resistance. What does that look like? You get fatter, you gain weight. You go to your doctor, they take your blood, that you present with high cholesterol. They tell you that you need to change your diet. Maybe they'll give you a statin drug to help reduce your cholesterol, or you might present with high blood pressure, or both. If it's high blood pressure, the doctor might say, what would you say?
It depends how high it is.
You'll say, are you stressed?
Are you stressed?
Right now, everyone's
White
stressed.
coat hypertension.
Yeah.
What's going on? And
Yeah.
and remember, we should never look at these things as one-off, readings. It's
Mm.
more of a trend
Exactly.
that we should be evaluating.
Exactly. So if you've got chronically elevated blood pressure,
It's a
You
lot
know,
more worrying than a one-off.
yeah, it's like you got to handle your stress. You've got to decrease your sodium intake. Stop eating so much salt. Maybe you'll put them on an antihypertensive medication. I handle that a little bit differently. There's a reason why the majority of the time people are experiencing this metabolic syndrome phenomena,
Mm.
and we can handle that just purely through nutrition,
Yes.
right? And so you got to bring the insulin right down. I mean, one of the reasons excess amounts of insulin causes high blood pressure is it causes sodium retention and fluid retention in the kidneys,
Yes.
right? And you end up with renal hypertension and overall blood pressure increases. So if you can restrict your carbohydrate intake for a period of time, we can correct that.
Yeah.
If you've ever been on a ketogenic type diet and you've restricted carbohydrates, you might notice that you urinate a lot. That's without all that insulin causing sodium and fluid retention, your diureses, right? What you must be responsible for in that case is you got to get the fluid back in, so
Yes.
you must drink plenty of water, and you must supplement back in the electrolytes, because you do lose magnesium, calcium, potassium, and sodium. You got to get these electrolytes back in for muscle function, both cardiac, skeletal muscle, but also smooth muscle.
I think a lot of people are actually magnesium deficient,
Yes.
hypermagnesiemic,
Yes.
without realizing it. And we're not going to go into this now, but you mentioned statins and you mentioned salt intake.
Yes.
Um,
Some of the other medications that people might find themselves on, the popular ones are proton pump inhibitors,
yeah,
like a Somac or Nexium.
yes.
And 100% of my clients who are on those medications stop taking them within 7 to 10 days.
Yeah.
They just don't need them anymore. I mean, a lot of the time it's because they've, either they were sick a lot or they had a surgery and the antibiotics. When you take an antibiotic, it's like an atomic bomb going off in your gut,
Yeah.
and creates
Oh,
a
really?
clearing.
Alters the bowel flora.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you get opportunistic bacteria from lower in the colon sometimes come up and populate those areas. And,
So-called second brain,
right.
which I think you and I have touched on before.
Yeah.
The one thing I was about to say was statins and salt intake. There are controversies there as well, which we won't go into right now. But yeah, a good balanced diet, drink a lot of water,
Yes.
and try to avoid being on medication. I think this whole concept of polypharmacy
Mm.
and the side effects, and then you treat side effects with another drug, which then gives more side effects, and before you know it, you're on a cocktail of medication, which is not good for you.
No.
So
No.
couldn't agree with you more there.
And it's empowering to kind of
To take charge of your
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that actually really reinforces other aspects of your life as well. And people see themselves from being a victim to now owning something,
Mm.
and then to becoming a champion. And you refer to a lot of people as champions as well. And you champion their cause.
Totally.
And the
Yeah.
psychology here is, one cannot underestimate
Yes.
how important that is.
Yeah.
And I think you do an incredible job there.
Yeah, but so getting back to with your immune system,
Yeah.
right? When you get infected with a virus, the first line of defense are those natural killer cells and interferons, and if that takes energy, right? And so energy metabolism is required by our innate immune system and our adaptive immune
To
system,
function.
right?
Yeah.
And you can get that suppressed when you're in a pre-existing state of metabolic dysfunction. Your immunity, your innate immunity, first line of defense against a viral infection, is suppressed.
Yes.
So that means you can't handle the virus as soon as it comes in. It gives the virus time to replicate and cause more damage. So the disease severity accelerates faster and you end up in a more severe state faster, right? Now, I came back from the States. I was probably exposed. I know it's amazing. You get online and you can check on your flight, are there any confirmed COVID-19? It was amazing. There was one like 6 rows in front of me on my flight. It's highly likely that I was exposed to the virus. When I came back, I did notice a bit of a dry throat. That was it. One morning.
Yeah, I remember you ringing and telling me.
Yeah, I rang you and I said, here are my symptoms.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit clammy, which was unusual for me because I just never get infections. Like, the past 3.5 years of my life, I've gone through a lot. I've gone through a marriage separation and, you got moving house and I lost my mother and all the things that would cause a lot of stress in a human being's life. I went through all of that. Not once have I even had a cold.
Yes.
It's really unusual for me to kind of get sick. So I felt a little bit clammy, had this sore throat. I went and got tested 4 days after that. And the test came back negative.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the test is a test for the viral RNA.
Yep.
Using polymerase chain reaction. So you're looking for the genetic material of the virus in that location where they swab.
Yeah.
It may have been the case that I was exposed and I cleared it. I don't know, right? How I will know is when we get the serology test and we can take a blood sample and see if my immune system has elicited an antibody response against the virus and therefore I'd be immunologically protected.
And that would be the gold marker.
Yes.
I think it's probably pertinent to mention that there are so many tests out there right now, some of which are very questionable, and they're giving false negatives. So just bear in mind that there are people who are perhaps out to make a quick buck or whatever it may be. It's similar to a lot of things that are being opportunistically distributed right now. There are tests as well.
Yeah, they have to be validated. So, I don't know, whatever, 99% of the testing done is polymerase chain reaction. And that's like, is it there or is it not there?
Yeah.
But when we say is it there, we mean here in the throat, or the nasal swab or the throat swab.
There are too many.
You may have had it, it may have cleared, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's a bit hit and miss. What we really need in the market is an accurate, well-validated serology test. I'm fortunate enough to be connected to someone who's developed that. And it's an all-in-one, so it detects IgG, IgA, IgM, right? And they've developed it for humans and animals.
Yes.
But it's being clinically validated, right, at the moment, and that will be published, we think, within the next month or two. So that's exciting.
And again, for the benefit of the listeners, Ig stands for immunoglobulin, and we've spoken about type G, type A, type M, and an antibody, it's a synonym for an immunoglobulin.
Yes.
So it's an Ig. So that's what we're referring to.
Yeah, and this test is great in that it is all in one to test. So you elicit a particular immune response, IgM
initially,
and then on second challenge, the IgM count might be similar to the first challenge, but the IgG count will be huge and protect us. So this is a test that was used to do contact tracing in Singapore, which was amazing because there was an outbreak amongst 2 different church groups, and they did the PCR testing on those who were symptomatic, and they couldn't find the connection between these 2 groups. How did they all get infected? And using the serology test, the blood test, they were able to identify a couple that were not symptomatic, and they actually had antibodies against COVID-19. So they were the missing link that joined the 2 groups and infected the whole. I mean, it's just amazing.
Fascinating.
It's fascinating biology. if you haven't seen the movie Contagion,
Yeah.
or, it's pretty accurate. I mean, it's a little bit exaggerated, but you know how it kind of happens is that's it.
Yeah.
That's what happened with
So I thought
SARS.
that was a good movie, and
Yeah.
that was one where the journalist was also trying to get a story and something, was it in Hong Kong or somewhere originally, taken to the USA and then spread.
Well,
Something
it
like
was
that from
based.
memory?
It was kind of based around what happened with SARS,
Yeah.
the SARS outbreak.
This is with the British actor, right?
Um,
Or am I
It's-
confusing the movie?
oh,
I might be confusing the movie.
yeah, but with SARS, like what actually happened, it couldn't have been scripted any better.
Yeah.
This guy gets in a lift, and there's like 6 other people in the lift, coughs, and they all get infected, and they all are from different countries. So they all go back to their own countries, and that's how it kind of spread.
Mm.
Just one ride in a lift, and one person coughed
So-
irresponsibly.
2 things, more out of intellectual interest. The other immunoglobulins, we've got ENS, correct? IgA, GENS from memory, and depending on the challenge you have a different dominance and also time period and so on.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to ask you is in terms of the implications to society. Now that a lot more people are worrying about the population densities and so on, do you think that there's going to be a change in perhaps even planning regulations and the way society is now made up, public transport, the role of even the high street? Are things going to be more hub and spoke, whereas before it was moving a lot more to, major shopping complexes? Do you think more local areas? And this is the kind of thing that actually, for me, this is more fascinating than just the pure medical aspect.
Yeah.
How you can change the whole trajectory of living.
Yes.
Period. Not just living as in being alive, but functioning in society and that
Well,
kind of
I
thing.
think, we're at a time now, when you look back at history
Yeah.
and how cultures evolved and who won what war and how societies changed, very little is documented in terms of how disease and medicine kind of influenced all of that.
Yes.
There's very little around how, I don't know, I think it was yellow fever helped cause the end of slavery in the US. Won't get into details, but I think this is one of those cases where we'll see some major shifts in, like, cultural shifts and how we relate to each other as individuals, how we relate to each other as countries,
Yes.
International trade, or I don't know, who knows, but there's many people way smarter than me. I mean, that's the good thing, is that there are these brilliant people out there looking at it from different perspectives, economic, politically, even religious, and social scientists and linguists, and I mean, it's amazing.
True.
Everything's coming together
And it
now.
has to come together.
It has to.
It has to.
Yeah.
And, you're right. Medicine, disease, and say the town planning as an example. Historically, they were looking at fires, the Great Fire of London. That changed things. Or in France, with the nice promenades and so on, it was all related to civil unrest
Yeah, right.
and, rebuilding with a different pattern, being more spaced apart. And perhaps we're now going to see a change in that kind of living as well, as a consequence of this hidden enemy,
Yeah.
the beast versus the virus, as you said.
Yeah,
initially,
I mean,
which is,
I liked in that paper, which wasn't actually talking about a viral pandemic, but given that virus was used as a metaphor, and what that study group generally came up with as a solution to that problem was education and social reform,
Yeah.
right? With a commitment to inoculate, using that term, the community or the population of people against the threat, right?
We're smiling again, because again, when I use the word politics, in this case geopolitics, the 30-minute timer kicked in and I was stopped in my tracks. So back to what I was saying, if you look at the South China Sea, the areas around the Spratlys and that kind of thing, the Philippines, Vietnam, are all in a slightly heightened state right now, because whilst one of the American defense ships has had to withdraw because a lot of its sailors are unwell, I was reading in a number of publications that actually China has continued to encroach into other waters, and I think this is all triggered by a fisherman's vessel ramming into a large Chinese ship, a warship, or large Chinese protective, Coast Guard kind of vessel. So actually, the consequence of all of this can change politics around the world, not just nationally, but internationally as well.
Yeah.
And again, it's the art of war, where we've got this enemy, and then we've got the traditional enemies as well that we see in war, and of course that then opens another thing.
It's such a great metaphor though, because viruses generally, the virus doesn't harm us. Right?
Yeah.
Our body kills itself, right? With the acute respiratory
and that's
distress.
what some people are saying. This is an over response by the body, and without going into too much there, and we touched upon.
But in this case, the virus isn't going to destroy our society or our economy. We do.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Yes.
In how we respond to the perceived threat that whatever is
and
coming at us.
whatever's implemented as a response as well. But
Yeah.
also biowarfare as well. This kind of shows you how systems that you previously think cannot be stopped can completely be wiped out.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
It truly is.
Now the key is, at the individual level,
Yeah.
don't do that to yourself.
Yes.
I mean, at least you have a say over what's going on here.
Yeah.
And people are stuck at home, you're stressed, it's uncertain, you're worried, you're in very close proximity for extended periods of time with people that normally you could have a break from, and now you're getting really narky at each other. People are doing a lot of sitting, their hamstrings are tight, they're not activating their glutes, they've got lower back pain, so they've got that pain behavior and they're more irritable. How do people deal with it? They eat.
Yes.
They eat food, and what kinds of food? They eat high sugar foods,
Yeah.
refined carbohydrates, and particularly those foods that there's a combination of carbohydrates and fat.
The big hit.
Right? It
Yeah.
really, exactly. It's kind of comforting and nurturing, and there's a reason why we do that, we think. And that is, it kind of, when you're a baby on the breast and you want a baby to somewhat be addicted to feeding because it's a rapid growth period in a human being's life. So that sugar-fat combination, which is kind of breast milk, overrides what we call the satiety center in the brain, and it's so easy to overeat those foods, and then you have later on you come off the breast, you wean off it, people still consume dairy, so our brains never really alter to come off that food combination, and it still occurs as nurturing and comforting to us. And then there's the bastardization of those foods, so ice cream, chocolate,
I was about to say custard,
all the stuff that we get addicted to,
stuff,
right? And it's so easy to overconsume. One of the boxes of food that was delivered to me when I was in my first week of quarantine had bless my friends, they put a packet of chips in there, Smith's
which
chips.
to you was like,
I don't buy those foods, I don't eat them, but it's there, I'm going to eat it, right?
Yeah.
Someone gave it to me, so I put a movie on. What's a movie, like an hour and 3/4? I ate this whole packet of chips, 170 gram packet of chips, and I'm looking at the label and that's like 920 calories, right? And I thought, wow, and I'm still hungry, right? So you've got to manage that, because it's very easy to overeat. All of a sudden, your exercise is seemingly important to everyone. See people out there and they're all exercising. It wasn't so important a month ago. All of a sudden, it's really important. But the key is you can't out-exercise a bad diet.
Yeah.
So you really want to be vigilant around how you manage your eating habits.
So you are what you eat.
You are what you
Truly
eat.
you are.
You really are.
Yeah.
So if you're going to eat less, have protein in most of your meals, or 3 or 4 meals a day. Make sure there's some protein in there. Protein is satiating.
Yeah.
It'll keep you a bit fuller, so you won't be so peckish all the time. Keep some chopped up celery and cucumber and raw mushrooms and radishes, and eat lots of lettuce with your meals, lunch and dinner in particular. That'll help fill you up and stretch your gut. So what happens is your gut releases a hormone called ghrelin, and ghrelin tells your brain that you're full, you don't need to eat anymore. So the more stretched your gut is, the less hungrier you'll be throughout the day. And just be a grown-up about it. You know, sometimes being an adult is just a lot of self-parenting. Just saying no.
Yeah.
I have to do it, you know.
We all have to do it. Life is about the choices we take. Sometimes situations are forced upon us, but we still have a choice with most things. So to wrap up...
Oh, there's just a couple of other things that I do.
Yeah.
You know, I consume a lot of polyphenol antioxidants, and, you know, I do that with...
Tell people what that means, polyphenol.
Sure. So these are, if you're going to eat plants, eat, if you can, organic. They're more stressed because they don't have the chemicals protecting them. And when plants are stressed, they increase the production of these molecules, some of which are polyphenol antioxidants. And what they do is they help protect us when we're challenged, when we're stressed. And they have been shown to increase or activate our survival genes that enables us to not get sick and live longer and like that, right? So I like wine. I drink wine, and I'm fortunate in that I also manage the Wine Doctor here in Australia. And so this is polyphenol enriched, and I have a couple of glasses of that per day.
So what if someone is a teetotaler who doesn't drink?
Yes.
For religious reasons or lifestyle, whatever it
Lots
may be.
of green tea.
Yep.
Drink green tea throughout the day. You know, there is some evidence, some statistical correlations that suggest the more cups of green tea you consume throughout the day, the longer you'll live. So
they say the same about miso soup as well, don't they?
Yeah, just any of these. Like overall, you want to have, it's not just one product or one supplement. You want to have a week's worth of menu items that elevate the polyphenol antioxidant content. Lots of colourful vegetables, you know, green leafy stuff, and also look after your gut health. So that includes, don't eat so much sugar and fat. And I personally take an advanced probiotic. If you want more details on that, contact the clinic here at Ignite Medispa and we can direct you in the right direction. But and then if you are overweight, if you do have symptoms of metabolic syndrome, get help. There's ways that we can handle it. You can do it from at home. It's cost effective. You can handle your metabolic syndrome. You can lose the weight. You can come out of this pandemic looking fabulous on the other side. It really is possible without exercise. You don't need the gym or anything like that. I handle it all nutritionally. If you do want to empower your innate protective immune system, you can do that with advanced nutrient therapy. I got, when I was in the United States, and also when I got out of quarantine, I got some intravenous nutrient therapy.
What are your thoughts about that? Because we've got newcell here. My understanding is vitamins C, D and zinc have the most research evidence supporting their use. And of course in Australia there's a limit on what one may promise or suggest. And I've always encouraged patients to go and do their own research and homework. PubMed is a good site. And even when you look on Google, be aware that anyone can have any opinion, and you must take everything that you hear, weigh it up, and come to your own conclusions. But in a nutshell,
well, I do it.
You do it.
I think vitamin C.
Yep.
Zinc.
Yep. D, B complex.
D, B, bit of glutathione.
Yep.
And some magnesium just to help chill me out.
And these are all the components that go into the newcell blends.
Yes.
So you've nailed it, and actually that wasn't scripted in any way. We're having a very candid talk. Also previously I was somewhat critical of intravenous infusions with vitamins and micronutrients for no other reason but then apart from contemporary medicine, allopathic medicine teaching you to be somewhat dismissive and to put a lot of focus on pharma and drugs. But having looked at things over the last 2 years or so in greater depth, I actually do believe that there is a role. It's no substitute for traditional, treatments and that kind of thing. So by no way, or by no means am I saying that IV vitamin C is a substitute for oncological treatments, etc., etc. Some people do. I'm keeping well away from that argument. I don't know enough to give a valid response. But I can say that it will support the immune system and that there is evidence that substantiates that. But one of the things that I found quite frustrating is a lot of studies are done with different parameters, so interpretation bias, and so many other things, cohort biases and that kind of thing, which makes it very hard to compare studies. So review articles I found are more useful. So if you are doing your homework, of course, have a bit of an understanding there, look at the N or the power of the study, the number of people who are part of it, look at the way it's being supported, whether there are vested interests, all of that stuff.
And and find experts that you're willing to trust.
Yes.
And which makes a big difference in a condition or an environment of much distrust, to be able to identify those that you are willing to say, you know what, I can take their word for what they're saying and take actions. If you want to handle your health, take an action. Get someone to work with you. Be accountable to something. The universe doesn't respond to well-meaning, well-intentioned ideologies or even a commitment to advance your knowledge whilst at the same time you're not handling anything. You have to act. So this is the time now to get invested in your health. How you demonstrate that in reality is by taking action and producing the results.
So to summarize, I think we've covered everything from bats to the immune system, vitamins, diet, responsibility, politics, and the camera hasn't stopped this time. And really all we can conclude by saying is look after yourselves physically, mentally, wellness and well-being. Don't be dismissive of those. Understand the limitations being placed on you, understand the stresses that are currently on you. Perhaps avoid too much media exposure. Media overload is an issue. Be aware of misinformation. Try to be very pragmatic and always remember that there's going to be another perspective. Don't have a closed mind and be critical of people who are perhaps aggressively telling you that theirs is the only way, and so on. Society works because of different roles, different opinions, and so on. So all we're going to say is we wish you the very best. Dean Kilby, Niro Sivathasan, Ignite Medispa, the Wine Doctor, Newcell, everything that we do, we're trying to improve lives and improve well-being. So thank you very much indeed.